for me to like, oh, what do I do? But I was just like, actually, let me go ahead and do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I wound up making that choice. I think it was my junior year when I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, it was tough. I went to SMU to play football at a really interesting time because I don't know if I don't know if you're old enough to remember the death penalty. And, basically the NCAA shut down SMU football for 2 years and took away all the scholarships. And before that, they were like Southwest Conference champions, like Dickerson and James. They were like 1-2 in the nation. And then the deal was they were able to get all those awesome recruits into this little private school because of the money that was being paid under the table to all the guys. Right. So the NCAA comes in, they shut down the program. And like my freshman year, we had a team, but nobody could play. Yeah. And there was only 15 scholarships. Yeah. And then, the next year they only had 15 scholarships, but we had 85 underclassmen on, so like basically freshmen and redshirt freshmen, it was basically everything that comprised the team. And then we had to go out and I think 5 out of our last 6 games that season were against top 20 opponents. Yeah, including Notre Dame, who was like number 1 in the nation at the time. Anyway, it was crazy. And the one thing that I didn't consider going in there, I didn't anticipate blowing out my knee. And I never anticipated the fact that, if you have 85 underclassmen, your depth chart is 3 deep of everybody that's the same class. Yeah. Right. And so every year, you're trying to fight a depth chart that has somebody at the top that has, it's the same class as you, but has, is now a 2-year starter or is now a 3-year starter. And it's just like, man, how's this going to shake out for me? Right. And I'm, the time sacrifice. Yes. And I'm like, man, I am not seeing any reward for what I'm putting in here. Right. And, no, but it was interesting, because of everything that had happened before we got there, they did everything they could to try to, quote unquote, integrate athletes back into the student body. And so there was no athletic dorm. You had to live in the regular dorms of everybody else. There was no priority registration. And so we, it drove our coaches crazy, but we had guys that were consistently missing practice because they had labs or classes that they had to take for their requirements, right? And so I totally hear what you're saying. But so you decided that I think the biggest thing I dealt with walking away was football. In my mind, had always been part of my identity.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And so that was a tough transition. Right. Now, who, if that's not part of my identity, who am I? So what about you? How did...
That was and you know what? I didn't even make that realization until I had maybe taken up another identity. And then I realized I have been kind of like shuffling through it. And that was one of them. Because just like you said, especially if you're somebody who is passionate enough about it to go and do it on the collegiate level, or like you have the opportunity to do it there, that is undoubtedly and has been your identity as an athlete and specifically that sport. So it didn't dawn on me till after, but that was a tough thing for a second because there was the idea of being a regular student now, or like you're just a person, right? And like, what is it like? And it is like, what are you? Yeah. What am I now? Who am I now? Right. So, I guess there was that, but I think I pretty quickly kind of dove into being an art student because I was having to catch up to where I spend my time. I think that ends up connecting to my identity. Right. So I think that kind of happened to me because, just like you said, I weighed it out. Yeah. I weighed those two things out. Where was the reward? Right. How do I feel about these two things? And then the idea of longevity. Right. In that thing. Yeah. So it wasn't as hard of a decision / adjustment that I thought it was going to be. I definitely enjoyed that free time. Yeah. Because one of the things that was so crazy about it is they tell you, NCAA rules is that they can only take up 20 hours a week of your time. Meaning the athletics can only be 20 hours of the student athlete's week.
Right.
But of course they go over that.
Right.
20 hours is not enough to be a high performing program.
Right.
But there were certain things that I noticed even as a freshman that I think was like purely psychological, I want to say conditioning that I noticed, and it really didn't sit well with me. But I was doing it because I love to do this. And so being able to kind of like not have to do those things was great.
Right.
So I think I hung on to the pros of that. I missed the things that I missed about it, but I didn't realize going into it there'd be so much other stuff other than actually playing football that was connected to it.
Did you ever have any regrets later, like when football season would come around?
I did. There were times, they came and went a lot.
For a bunch of years, when football season would come around, I'd have these dreams about how I'd be back like in the dressing room, getting ready to go back out, and they're like, oh crap, I still have eligibility left, and they're taking me back. I'm going to get back in the game. That was weird for a bunch of years. But I think it was probably 15, 20 years that I had that, and then I don't know if it was like all the concussion stuff or whatever, but I'd stopped having those dreams. It's like I finally dealt with, you know what, I got out of it. I was healthy. I moved on. I created another identity. No regrets. Right. But anyway, I think I cut you off.
No, that's fine. But sure, like I've definitely had some of those like flashbacks or thinking about watching football and then thinking about like, man, like what would I be doing right now had I done this, or had I decided to stay in this longer, or had I done this, like. But I subscribe to the notion of things being ordered in a certain way. And so I'm like thankful for the time that I did have, so that when it comes to the question of like, man, I wonder what it would have been like to do that. It's like, well, I did see what it was like. So, I kind of got that. And so in that sense, I kind of count it all joy, because it's like, that was your chance. You did it then, and then now you made the decision. You did that. Your parents didn't make it for you. Nobody else made that for you. You did that. And so I just kind of stood on it that way. I don't know.
So what was the art program like at Mizzou? How did that progress for you?
It was good. It was very technique based.
Okay.
Very much so in the beginning, and I appreciate that. Just because all programs are different.
They are. And
I don't know if anybody has the perfect formula, considering the undergrad time is, 4 to 5 years is a short time to learn all of that material. So like every professor who writes a curriculum, especially, and now that I'm in that position, I know it. You only have so much time with those students. You have to try to give them as much as you can so that they don't need you. And they can take that, hopefully they practice it until they get to the next person. And so at Mizzou, very technique based, to the point where when it's time to work on concept, the way you execute it isn't a problem. And if it is, you have the mindset of, okay, when I pick this thing up, if I practice it like this at this speed with this diligence, I'll be able to pick it up and do what I need to do with it. And so I love it for that reason, because I see it now where there's some programs that may get into the concept and building the concept before all of all the technical problem solving is strong enough. And then you have people who just completely abandon that idea and just like, well, my work is purely conceptual and that's why it's this way, as opposed to where you're not really that strong in executing. So I really appreciate Mizzou.
And there's certainly a big debate around what value the art world places on concept versus craft. At this point, right? And I understand the value of concept, but I think it's important for someone to be great at their craft, because you're working in the craft you're more likely for your concept to change versus, those artists that, will outsource their craft.
Yes.
Hey, this is my concept.
Right.
And, here I'm having people help me execute the craft. Well, so much changes just being in the piece and working it, right?
Exactly.
And, I think there are missed opportunities when you're not doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right about that. There's definitely some missed opportunities.
Yeah.
I think there's certain things that happen in the midst of like developing something visually. You have this idea, but I think there's a bit of a symbiotic kind of relationship between those two, that especially in the development of a piece where you had this idea and then it's like, this is what I think it's going to look like, what I want it to look like. And then something happens in the midst of that. And then you see how that may connect with the concept or how it doesn't connect. And then you have to solve that problem. And I think I would say the closeness of that, like being in there, in that development stage is I think that's like the pocket.
Right.
I think that most people probably want to be in. When you outsource it, it's like, here's what I want.
Right.
Here's my idea. Make this happen. And there's a disconnect that's there that I don't know. I would love to have a conversation with somebody who does outsource their work.
Right.
To ask them about like how they feel and to get like an honest answer about how you feel about that when you see it happen.
Yeah.
How close do you feel to that work? Like how much do you actually know it?
Yeah.
When you're when you talk about like, this was my idea for it and this is what the execution was.
So it's almost like you're being a digital artist and you're hitting print.
Yeah.
Right?
And to a certain extent it is something like that where it's just like you can't recall the actual, I would say, the building of that.
Right.
And where your mindset would have been in building that. Because I have I think one of the things that helps me with anything I'm doing is my obsessive personality.
Right.
To where there's something I'm working on, I'm obsessed with it. I can't keep up with it unless I'm obsessed with it. So when I'm not around it, I'm thinking about, what would that be if I did this to it?
Right.
Or I dream about it at times. And so every piece that I've done, I can recall memories that I had with them. And it helps inform me if I'm going back and looking and try, because I feel like every piece that somebody makes, it tells them that it can tell you something about it months or even years after you've finished it.
Absolutely.
And so I think they're almost like time stamps or time capsules that kind of tell you about like, what were you thinking about at that time? Who were you in that time when you made that? And I think it's something that would maybe be hard to have and find and have that in the back of your mind if it was somebody else's hand that did it.
Absolutely. So you leave Mizzou. Did you go to UTA right away?
No.
So what was in between?
So immediately after leaving Mizzou, graduating from Mizzou, I stayed in Columbia for a couple years. My younger brother was still in school there. So I stayed in Columbia for a couple years. Immediately after graduating, I served as a visiting artist for Columbia Public Schools. So I did like a couple of district-wide projects with the schools. And then after that, I jumped into teaching. So I worked in early childhood special education.
Wow.
Yeah, I did that. And then after that, I moved back to Texas. So I moved back to Houston. And then I started working for Houston Independent School District. Okay. So I started out as I took my exam and all that, and I taught algebra. I was an algebra teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was an algebra teacher, and then I just couldn't stay away from it. And I had no plans to stay away from art. I always had this idea, I'll do this for a few years, and then I'll go to grad school.
Right.
But then I was like, I need it. And so I ended up becoming I already had enough hours to be qualified to be classified as highly qualified to teach art.
Right, exactly.
And so I became an art teacher. And so I was taking alternative certification programs for that. So I became an art teacher. And my time as an art teacher, I think that's what kind of turned me into what would be called